I think it's important to be logical about the paths and the tools and the training that exist and what they cost. And also at the same time, keep a really open mind about how that could turn out for you and what avenues might emerge that you haven't thought of yet, and be willing to follow your instincts a little bit on the kinds of things that you can both feel like you could become good at and that you would enjoy. And then just explore the world and talk to everyone you can about how they can help you achieve that, or what insight they might have that could help you realize a way to do something you actually enjoy in a sustainable way.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Path Found, the podcast about the real, messy, unexpected journeys that lead us to the work we love. I'm Monica Argandonia, and every week I talk with someone whose story proves there's no single right way to build a meaningful life. Elizabeth Miner started out in community organizing and grant writing and slowly started moving into multimedia for nonprofits. She wasn't planning on a design career, but after losing a couple of jobs to budget cuts that had nothing to do with her, she decided she'd rather bet on herself. She taught herself to build websites, went back to school for a second degree, and discovered, in her words, how much she didn't know she didn't know. 15 years later, she runs Silvermine Creative, where she designs brands and custom websites, and where she spent a lot of time thinking hard about what artificial intelligence is actually good for. In this conversation, part of our ongoing AI and Career series, Elizabeth talks about the entry-level design jobs that are quietly disappearing, the skills she thinks will survive, the ethical trade-offs she's decided she can live with, and the several hours she once spent in Photoshop fixing the face of a bee. This is Path Found. I'm so happy to have you here today, Elizabeth, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, especially because of this working relationship you and I have had now over the past few months, and we can talk about that. But like I start with everybody, give us a little bit of your background and how you got here.
So I've been working in the general marketing and communications space for most of my career. I started out in the nonprofit sector, doing a lot of community organizing, and then moved into grant writing and then into other types of communications for nonprofits, and started to get into a little bit of multimedia things for them. And then after losing a couple of successive nonprofit jobs to cutbacks and things that were beyond my control, I decided that I wanted to work for myself. And so I started out first just sort of as a self-taught website builder and designer, and eventually went back to school for a second degree in design and found out how much I didn't know and got a lot better. And so I have owned my own business doing that for close to 15 years now. And my emphasis is on brand design and general graphic design and custom websites.
So when you first started, did you know kind of that was what you wanted to do? Like, what did you do in college?
In college, I studied anthropology, which did inform a lot for me in terms of just understanding people and how to speak to different kinds of people, which sorts of things are somewhat universal, which things are really specific to culture. And so all of that's been really useful to me. I didn't know for sure that I would go into an artistic field with it, but I've always enjoyed art and creative pursuits as well. So it did make a lot of sense together. And when I had a chance to work with more than just language, but with presentation and visuals in my previous jobs, I always liked those tasks the best. So it wasn't a huge leap from there to move in that direction.
So when you started your own business, how was that?
It was a little tricky at first. I was definitely kind of winging it and teaching myself a lot as I went. And I chose smart, clients to work with who I knew that I could deliver good work for them. But it took me forever because I had to sort of learn by doing. It took a long time to execute any projects. And, when I did get a chance to get feedback from people with more experience, I realized how much more there was to learn. And so I was definitely eager to just fill in those gaps and raise my skill level a little bit.
So in the beginning, 15 years ago, that is pre-AI, how have you seen your industry change over the last 15 years?
I think the tools have become much more sophisticated, and I'm glad that I got in when I did because they already felt extremely sophisticated when I started, but they've definitely become more complex now. And there's been sort of a branching off with the tools where a lot of tools then came on the market to allow, anyone to do design. And that had a big impact on our industry too. because people sort of lost track of the difference between tools and the expertise about why things work and, how to put them together successfully and make effective work. So I definitely felt a little bit of a heat from that, but the clients that I was working with understood that they still wanted a human who had actually studied this stuff at the helm using those tools. But that was a big shift for our industry. And then, of course, the AI shift is even more empowering to people to create things on their own, but it's also causing a sort of a proliferation of stuff that isn't really the best example of what could be done. And it's hard when that's the sea that you're swimming in and what your potential clients are seeing all around them. It becomes a challenge of really reminding them what training is worth and what the human element can bring that those tools and machines can't replicate.
So when you talk about web design and going back 15 years and, how it's changed, what goes into that on your end? What are all the steps? What are the things that, in layperson language, what goes into that?
So there's a whole bunch of research and conversation before we even start building to get at what distinguishes this brand from, everything else that people will be seeing when they go to search for them. What can we sort of draw out and really enhance and make a signature of the brand experience? So a lot of it is the brand strategy and how that's going to translate into the website. And sometimes I get people coming to me who haven't really thought through a lot of that yet. So there's a lot of establishing what the brand is all about up front. And then we get into thinking about, okay, how do we translate that into an online experience for people? And then the second phase is kind of to mock up what the site can look like in tools that are offline, just to make sure that we're not spending a lot of time building things we don't want and that we have the general look and plan figured out. And then I go into actually designing and building in web publishing tools. And I use WordPress primarily. I use Elementor Pro WordPress Builder to design pages and layouts. And then I've been building kind of a library of those individual pieces that I can customize differently for each client to make sure that they're getting something that looks really unique to them, but that I can build in an efficient way.
So how long does it take you to build a typical website?
So one of my fun little quirks of my brain is that I'm very bad at estimating how long something will take. I have to observe myself and do a lot of math to estimate that. But I would say the quickest that I've gotten something up for somebody that just needed a simple kind of landing page and they knew exactly what it needed to do and roughly what it needed to look like, you could get, something up in a week or two. But I've also spent 3 months or more with people on their websites. And when they're big and involved like that, I like to do it in phases. So I'll say, why don't we, agree on this baseline plan for what the design looks like and these core functions that we need most, and publish that when we're happy with it, and then build out sort of a phase 2 of the nice to haves and the more extensive content that starts to frame them and help them become more visible, and do it in phases if it's a longer, more complex project.
Okay. And now, how has AI changed that?
AI has allowed me to customize even more for people, even who might not have had the budget for me to do that before, or the time for me to do that before, because I can write custom code to make things behave and look exactly the way I want them to and make them more distinctive. It's certainly helped me enormously with troubleshooting, because all of the design tools that I'm using are constantly evolving, and the functions that they have are so numerous that I'm always having to still do new things that I haven't done before or that have changed. So the AI really helps me work through that stuff a lot faster, just the technical, how do I get this done well and fast? It helps with copywriting to an extent, for outlining or for making my own language more concise. Brevity is not my strong suit. So I like to get all of my ideas and creativity down and then have it help me clean that up. And I've used it to a limited degree for imaging, especially for clients that maybe don't have many photos yet. They might be developing a new product. They might be working with an audience that is sensitive or underage, or it's a medical scenario and they can't provide photos of their real clients. So I have used AI and built some profiles that really describe their brand and the purpose of the photography, and then made some photo sets for them that kind of visually tell their story exactly the way we want and look at least more unique and real than stock photography would. But I tend to turn to that when it either enables me to do something that is otherwise impossible, or when we just don't have the assets to work with from another method, rather than having it be my default.
So as a small business, as a right? It's only you.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with subcontractors when I needed different skill sets or extra help, but my business is me primarily.
It's been beneficial.
Yes. It's made it easier for this to even be a viable way to earn a living because I can spend so much more time on the creative stuff and automate or just get help with the practical stuff that used to eat up days at a time.
Where do you see it not being helpful?
I don't think that any large language model is ever going to be great at coming up with the core visual concept to communicate a brand's identity and culture and story, because it just doesn't have those associations. It doesn't really understand what it's making and why it works. It just understands what we're asking for and what the greatest number of people on the internet so far has considered a satisfactory answer to that request. And then it sort of averages all of those findings. So you're getting something that's sort of like the lowest common denominator almost of every example of what you've talked about. It can't come up with something completely original by itself. So, and the whole point of branding is differentiation, right? You're trying not to look like everybody who came before you. So I don't think it's helpful for that. And I don't think it ever will be with the way that our current AI is made, because that's just a limitation of how it works. It's predictive. So it has to reference only what's come before. But it can be helpful for doing research in branding. It can be helpful for making specific components that I will then use my own tools and put together into something that is much more efficient and cleaner than what I could have done if I started with a blank page.
So if I'm starting my own business and I need a website, what would you tell me why I shouldn't go to AI and have it build me a website, especially if I'm on a small budget?
I think in order to get the kind of result that you would deserve and want from AI in that situation, you would have to spend so much time training your AI and training yourself on how to actually coach it to deliver something that is going to resonate with the right people, that is going to understand the psychology of the person and the journey that they're taking through the site, and that is going to produce visuals that look like they belong on a professional website, that it would not be worthwhile. So if you go in and just give it a very cursory request, what you're going to get is you're going to outgrow it really fast. You're going to start to find flaws with it and not know exactly how to fix them because you didn't build it. And I think you'd end up spending as much time to get something inferior. Agree to allow AI to be used in the process, but have somebody steering that who has already trained an AI on websites and built a lot of modules that they've tested and know work, and that has also thought about, the psychology and the user journey and all of these things that go into making visual design actually effective.
And I will confirm that. I mean, obviously, I've worked with you. You've built my website for me. I can attest that, yes, we spent several months figuring out even what it was going to look like. What did I want to put out there? I mean, you asked me questions that I wouldn't have thought about. And so, there's definitely a lot more in it than just the mechanics behind that webpage. And I see that part. You don't think that'll get better?
I think some elements of it will get better. And a lot of it, once you learn the tools, the tools are already there. But I think that, like I said, that element of understanding a human's reaction to what they see is something that the AI isn't really able to do. And a lot of the fine tuning is difficult for it too, because it can't see the work coming together while it's doing it and then make adjustments to make it better. It creates one big massive formula based on what you've said and what it's been trained with. And then it executes that formula, and that's the product. And some of them have now allowed for a step where they reevaluate the output and refine it and then give it back to you. But they still can't look at an image, of a model for the clothing you're selling in like a weird position and think like, ooh, that looks painful and unnatural. Like it can't tell that, and it can't, make a choice between two design directions that we might go based on which one just really grabs you and the other one just doesn't. And so I think there will always be room for humans to steer the AI and get much better results than what it can do on its own, just because of those limitations of being a human and having a body and having relationships and associations from your own history and all of those things that come into your reaction to what you see in front of you. that aren't really simulatable. So I think it will replace a lot of lower level design careers, and it already is. But I think that the ones that do remain important and intact are the ones where someone is sort of thinking on the art direction level about the big picture and identifying what works and what doesn't, and then making those last level of refinements themselves to make sure that everything makes sense to a human.
So when you're talking about the lower level positions and, someone listening to this who wants to go into this industry, what are those positions that you think will be replaced? And then what would you tell people how to prepare for that?
I think that the entry-level positions that used to be fairly numerous in terms of just like, we need to produce a newsletter every week and it needs to be neat and laid out and have the branding the same, and you need to put all the photos and the images in, that just sort of like executing straightforward work. I think some people will still be doing it, but because they'll have AI tools to help them, they won't need as many of those people. So those jobs will probably be reduced, and are already being reduced from what I hear for people who are looking for jobs to be in-house designers. I think people that were making a lot of money off of producing stock graphics and images and things like that may find it harder because people can create more original stuff now by asking the AI to make exactly what they want instead of searching for hours for a close proximity. And I think anyone entering this field will really want to focus on making sure they understand how the AI tools actually work and what they're great for and what they're bad for. And then really teaching themselves to think conceptually from a higher level viewpoint about the big picture of the purpose of the work that they're producing and how it's going to help their client actually achieve their goals, rather than the minutia of how to execute what they're told to do, because that's the skill set that we can't really replace.
So some of those lower level positions and jobs that you were talking about, those help you build experience and kind of get to those upper level positions. How do you solve that problem if there aren't people doing those jobs anymore, or you're coming right out of college and you want to get into this industry, you can't break in as the art director? How do you see that transition?
That part is tricky, and it may involve, and this has always been an issue for designers, but doing a little bit of work that's just passion projects that's about, really cultivating the skill sets that you want to use the most and that that there's a market for and feel you could do well, and doing some examples, experimenting with all of the tools, learning from your AI about how to use it better, and having work to showcase that, shows that level of thinking and that level of practice, even if it isn't churning out a newsletter every week for a company. But it's tricky. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to employ as many people. So it may end up being a smaller and more specialized industry than it used to be. And I think that I wouldn't get into it now if I wasn't willing or able to put in the extra time to become that person who can think on that level and direct things on that level. And what you take in from others, just doing the research into the principles of visual design. If a degree is not in the cards for you, you still need to understand design principles, Gestalt psychology, the basics of typography, the basics of color theory, really like educating yourself about the things that make designs effective and powerful rather than just how to execute them.
And I think all those other experiences, that really speaks to, you don't have to major in art to do this. You don't have to major in design, that there's so many other fields that feed into this.
Adjacent, yes. And, sometimes the art director person hasn't had a lot of experience actually executing things in Adobe Illustrator. They may just really gravitate towards visual storytelling and have a different background that made them good at that. Like they took film classes, or they painted, or it just is something that they naturally find that they're good at, and the technician part becomes less important. But it is important to understand those principles that allow us to make designs that work with our psychology and our subconscious and our emotional responses, and the way that our brains just parse a lot of information and understand it and remember it. That stuff you do need to know, whether you get it from a degree program or a different online course, or from reading lots of, books and things. You do need to learn that stuff.
So what do you think, you kind of said what AI is not good at. What do you think it's bad for, or bad in general?
There are definite downsides. There are huge issues. And I think any designer that is not wrestling with those is doing a disservice to themselves, but also kind of the legacy that we're creating here. So using AI at all requires us to kind of embrace a paradox where on one hand, it has a giant environmental footprint and the development of it is fairly opaque and really convoluted. And the people making it and the people who are using it are scrambling to kind of understand what it can even do and what the risks are, and then govern those. And with no precedent, we're just making it up as we go. So, we have to wrestle with that. And then at the same time, these tools are empowering creatives to spend much more time being creative and not wasting their time on mundane tasks that don't matter. And it's allowing people like me who want to serve small businesses and entrepreneurs and nonprofits as well as the big guys to really help them grow their impact in a way that maybe they couldn't have afforded before or we couldn't have done before. So I just try to use it in a way that is aware of both of those things and is efficient and intentional. So looking at, which provider am I giving my money to? I recently did start migrating a lot of my stuff, my early ChatGPT work over to Claude, partly because I don't feel that corporations should be making massive donations to super PACs, especially when they're funding opposition to a lot of the sustainability and social accountability measures that I feel are really important and that my clients definitely feel are important. And then in terms of how I use it, I think the best way that we can avoid, ripping off other people's intellectual property and artistic work is by controlling the inputs. So when you ask AI to generate something for you, an image or a visual, you can provide references or you can just let it come up with whatever it knows from what it's been trained on. And so I try to iterate the projects in steps where I'm just asking for pieces at a time, and then I'll put them all together. And I'm trying to provide as much of the reference material as possible myself or source it from places that I know have not stolen it, that are in the public domain or that have been authorized for that kind of use, so that it's really still my editorial process that's leading the thing, and that I'm providing as much as possible of the raw material that it's working with, so that it's not just going off and having a free-for-all on the internet and coming up with something that's ripped off. So there are ways to mitigate those downsides, but they do exist. And I think designers who have a conscience about it are the ones that really need to stay informed about how these tools work, what they can do, what they can't do, what the options are if you want to use them responsibly, and to really speak up, get in those forums and say what you want to say about how it's generating work for you. Ask questions about how it was trained. Adobe, as of 2026, says that they are still training all of their generative AI and tech on art that was authorized for that use, where the artists were compensated or gave permission to use it that way, or both. So I try to start there at least and do as much as I can in platforms that have a little bit more of an ethical guardrail.
Do you think the pros outweigh the cons?
I sort of feel like that I don't have a choice but to use it to some degree, or I would just be out of the industry and my spot will be filled by somebody who doesn't have, a moral compass. So I choose to stay. I think for me individually, the pros way outweigh the cons, but that's often the case, that things are helpful and convenient to us individually, and that makes it easier to ignore the big picture. I have a feeling that the negative consequences, we're still just starting to see what some of those will be. And I have a feeling that others that, we're really doomsday about won't ever come to be that bad. But I think it's really hard for us to predict. We're really in pretty uncharted territory as far as, what the ultimate impact of whether it will be more positive or more negative for humanity. I've seen it go both ways, even just in my own efforts.
So, a lot of students right now are really pushing back on the idea of AI, some for environmental reasons and sustainability, some because they're afraid this is going to take jobs. But on the other hand, everybody I've talked to, whether for this podcast or just, personal conversations, who are working in industries, all say that the number one thing students have to do is learn how to use it and use it well. And so that's a really hard part of all this, right? So there's these cons and you're recognizing them, but you're also saying, if you don't use them, then you fall behind.
Right. And I think that there's a misconception out there among people that haven't really used them for these types of purposes before, that you can just like, that it replaces you doing any work, and you just say, AI, make me this, and it does. And if they try that for a little while, they'll see how absurdly bad those results are. So,
Right.
I mean, I've spent several hours working on one image that was like a key header image for my website of like a bee and flower that was sort of used metaphorically for branding and the idea of like attracting just the right person for your specific brand, which is why flowers are so beautiful, right? And so I used the AI to do a little research on types of flowers that are also like naturally occur in my brand colors, and then I sourced a bunch of images of those from sources that I knew I felt comfortable taking images from instead of just wherever. And then, we put that together and then we added the bee, and it was like, oh my God, this bee is like tripping me out. He's horrible. He was like looking at me weirdly over his shoulder, which I don't think bees can even do. And so I had to take that into Photoshop and like, manipulate the face back towards the flower and change the lighting so that it looked like it was reflecting off the flower, and put a little blur on the wings so it looked like it was flying and not just floating there. So it was still easier than me going to India and photographing plumerias when the bees were out, but it was not by any means like removing the work or the effort or the, editorial decision making that I was doing to make this thing happen. So I think if people can learn to integrate it and to actually use their own thoughts and words to tell the AI very specifically what you want and why, instead of just using references, that you can mitigate a lot of the ethical problems with it. And you can also make yourself still a valuable asset in the field because of your own original ideas and, decision-making and discernment, and keep your job. And it could get you in trouble if you aren't thoughtful about it. When you can show your work and that, it came from your own thoughts and that you were asking for specific things for specific reasons, that actually protects you legally a lot better too. So if I had a brand that just said like, oh, we want you to make an avatar of our ideal client and she's an Oprah type, like I'm not going to go to AI and type Oprah. I'm not going to say the name ever. I'm going to ask that client, like, what do you think it is about Oprah that your clients like? Can you think of other people that are well-known that they also would like, and then I might show them 20 pictures and be like, which of these look the most like what you're looking for and why? And then I might ask the AI to describe what do all these 4 pictures have in common? And then I might write a prompt using what I liked from what the AI told me all those photos had, and then put that back in, you know what I mean? And then you're never saying Oprah. You're saying, I want a diverse representation of mature women who are self-possessed and stylish, and the brand tone is authoritative but also warm. Right. And, here are some examples that I already mocked up of not real people. And then let it give me something. And, it's going to turn out a lot better. But that's a skill set that takes, a day and a lot of thought. And that's the kind of skill that I would work on cultivating if I wanted to have any kind of job using AI.
That's excellent. Okay, so a young person comes to you, they're in college, they really like doing this kind of stuff. This is what they want to make their career. What do you tell them? Because you just said that there's going to be less jobs.
There are, yes. I think I would tell them to get more specific earlier on about, a feasible role that they want to work towards, rather than just assuming once I've completed X education, I'll just start applying for things on Indeed and I'll get one of them. To be more deliberate about it, to think about projects they could do even just on their own to really showcase exactly what they want to do, and then to just stay really involved with the tools and understanding how they work so that they feel caught up. And when they do get hired by someone because they've said that they know how to use AI, they mean that they know how to use, recent versions to do things that people actually need. And just, be really thinking about that specific career design that they would like to have, rather than just assuming degree leads to applications leads to, my first job. And then I just work my way through different jobs till they're better.
Right. So, and what about starting your own business? What advice would you give people going in that direction?
Yeah, I would say have some diversity in your income in the beginning, some other things to fall back on or do part-time, or maybe it's one sort of boring contract, but it pays the bills, so that you don't stress yourself out, because if you're working for yourself, there's going to be income fluctuation, especially if you aren't really into making reproducible things or courses for other designers, or those kinds of things that you can just sell on repeat. If you want to do custom work, there's going to be fluctuation. So I wish that, I sort of was into other stuff at the time that I started out. So I did have some other income streams. But when I really went to make this business my only income stream, I faced that kind of stress all over again. When I removed those other pieces, I realized if I have a dip, it's like I really feel it. So planning for that in a smart way and trying not to be resentful about, the work that you do on the side, to have time and to be able to afford to do this too. And to start thinking early and thinking big about money. I wish that I had done that a little bit more. I think I didn't want to think about it being, it's for the money, but there's no reason that we should hold ourselves back either, just because we're in a creative field. Inflation moves fast. Expenses of life and expenses of running a business are increasing faster than a lot of our salaries are increasing. So looking at your numbers, trying to rid yourself of the emotional baggage around money to the extent that you can, that's been a challenge for me that I continue to work on. But it's a necessary thing to be able to face and deal with if you want to be in business for yourself, or even in a small business with a few partners or a few employees. Then you have the pressure of paying them too. So
where do you see yourself then in 5 years, 10 years?
I'd like to be able to hire more help. That would be lovely. And I would like to get increasingly targeted about the clients that I'm working with. Environmental and social justice issues have always been really important to me. I worked on those issues a lot in my nonprofit career, and I want to work with companies and nonprofits that are helping to advance that stuff even more than I already am. And so each time I sort of iterate on my own brand, I'm trying more and more to sort of speak to that audience and let them know they're in the right place. And I'd like to be able to give back more, to, have more money that I can contribute to causes that I feel strongly about, have more opportunity to pitch them work to help them advance something important, even if it's not a big profit thing for me, because I have room to do that. So those would be considerable, measures that I haven't quite fully achieved yet that I want to see happen. And, I could stand to level up a few things in terms of ever paying myself and enjoying money a little bit. We've adopted a pretty minimalist lifestyle that most of the time I really enjoy, but once in a while I'd like to be able to say yes to some bigger things that I think when I bring on some more help under me, I'll be more equipped to do, just because I can deliver work faster and without compromising on quality.
Any last advice for young adults listening?
For young adults listening, I think it's going to be advice that they probably hear from a lot of your guests, which is what we were just talking about. There are so many paths that when you start over-designing your track ahead of time, it almost really limits you and puts you in a box that didn't need to be there. And so I think it's important to be logical about the paths and the tools and the training that exist and what they cost. And also at the same time, in the other hand, keep a really open mind about how that could turn out for you and what, avenues might emerge that you haven't thought of yet, and be willing to, follow your instincts a little bit on the kinds of things that you can both feel like you could become good at and that you would enjoy. And then just explore the world and talk to everyone you can about how they can help you achieve that, or what insight they might have that could help you realize a way to do something you actually enjoy in a sustainable way.
Nice. Where can people find you?
I am at silverminecreative.studio. That's my main website and link to my portfolio. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm not super active right now, but I'm there under Elizabeth Miner, Miner. So those are probably the best two places to find me.
And you can look up KeystoneNetwork.org and also see your work. You also did the PathFound logo, and
that was a fun one.
Yes, it's been a great partnership. Elizabeth, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk with us.
Of course. Thank you for having me and for giving me the opportunity to work on all of your projects with you. They've been really fulfilling and great.
Thank you so much for listening to PathFound. If anything we talked about today connected with you or gave you a new perspective, we'd love it if you subscribed, left a review, or shared the episode with someone you care about. You can also find us on Instagram at PathFound Podcast. To explore more stories, resources, and ways to get involved, visit KeystoneNetwork.org. This podcast is just one part of the journey. At Keystone Network, we're helping young people and anyone figuring it out as they go build meaningful futures one step at a time. A huge thank you to my podcast editor, David Strut, you can find him on LinkedIn, for helping bring these stories to life, and to Elizabeth Miner at Silvermine Creative for the beautiful artwork and web design. And if you're on your own path, navigating the unknown, making a pivot, or simply figuring it out as you go, just know you're not alone. The route may not be linear, but there's always a way forward. I'm Monica Argandonia, and I'll see you next time on Path Found.